Archaeodeath, Death and Memory, Past and Present, with Professor Howard Williams.
Welcome to a new episode of Mounds and Memory, your podcast dealing with the history and archaeology of death in the Viking Age. My name is Dr. Irina, and as usual, I am delighted to be joined by my colleague, Professor Howard Williams from the University of Chester. And today we're embarking on a magnificent journey on a magnificent ship, which is the Gokstad ship. We are dealing with one of the most famous Norwegian ship burials. This one in particular was uncovered on the largest farm of Sandefjord. We are talking about a mound of about 50 meters long in its original form, and it is complete with a large burial. It was excavated in the 19th century, and we have a lot of interesting things going on here regarding stratigraphy, regarding the subsequent mound breaking episodes, and generally speaking, the inventory, who was buried here, and what we can find out about this particular region during the Viking Age.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm really excited. This is the first real modern 19th century 1880 plus excavation of a Viking ship burial, and it's so important culturally for Norway and for our understanding of the Viking Age, because as soon as this was dug, the world knew what Viking or late Iron Age Scandinavian ships look like. And before then, we have art and fantasy. And suddenly, ever since, even all the earliest movies and evoking the Viking motif could get the ships kind of right. And so, of all the things we complain that the TV and Hollywood get wrong, we've always had the ships roughly right. And there was 19th century replicas, 20th century replicas, because of Gokstad. Gokstad's really set us into our modern fascination with Viking maritime expeditions, raiding, trading, kingdom formation, religious conversion, all the things that we capture into the Viking Age. It all begins with this supposedly pagan, pre-Christian furnished burial beneath a big mound with a ship, and this sort of is iconic in the true sense of the word for an archaeological find to then set in motion a sort of grounded understanding of the Viking Age beyond the sagas, beyond later literature, beyond Frankish annals and Anglo-Saxon chronicle. This gave us that material starting point for and that's why it's so important. But it's still important 150 or so years later, because the archaeological work at the site and around it has kept on going, and we've got so much more information now, and we still have lots of questions, but this is the ultimate example of Mound and Memory for us to get on to discuss.
Yes, exactly. A lot of interesting work has been done on it recently. We have a couple of articles written by Jan Biel, for example, collaboration with Rebecca Cannell, and so on, constructing and deconstructing the Gokstad mound, or the plundering of the ship graves. And we also have the very interesting work, which is not especially about Gokstad, but it is integrated into this whole story of relationship between mounds and landscape, and also how the monuments have been reused with the passage of time. It's the work called Før Viken ble Norge, so before Viken, this whole area became Norway, written by Bjørn Myhre.
Yes, of
course.
So this is
he talked a lot about Borre, which is
maybe we should start by just sort of framing this as this is the Vestfold area, this kind of this territory of I always get my descriptions of Norwegian geography a lot long. I would call it southeast, but is it? Would Norwegians call it southeast? I get confused, but it's certainly southern Norway.
Yeah, definitely.
It has to be southeast, doesn't it? Because of course west would be Stavanger and Bergen. Yeah, but it's that sort of eastern coast with Borre, Oseberg, Gokstad, and then Kaupang. It's a bit of a, to use a Slati Bartfast phrase, a bit crinkly. It's like the Douglas Adams description of Slati Bartfast making all the coast of Norway. He liked all the crinkly bits. It's the ultimate sort of crinkly coast of Norway, the product of geological and glacial action that, but it's a complex landscape to navigate in summer and winter. It's a maritime landscape, so all these sites are connected by the sea routes, as well as there would be a winter when the ice is covering, you'd be able to use sleds and sleighs and other ways of getting around. But this is a landscape that's very much integral to a sort of one of the many sort of proto kingdoms that is emerging in the later first millennium AD CE. And so it's clearly border, is almost contemporaneous with Sutton Hoo. It's part of that late 6th, 7th century sort of period.
Yes, it's pre-Viking, yeah.
Yeah. And so this is clearly an area. This is when people such as, well, most authors, but including Neil Price and his Children of Ash and Elm, who will be familiar to popular audiences, when he's talking about the aristocratic hall cultures of most of Northwest Europe, not specifically Scandinavia, with their heroic poetry and their bling and their trade routes already established, remember, with long distance goods flowing in. Raiding already established, remember. This is raiding in itself is not a new thing.
It's a continuous process.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about, and Gokstad is clearly added on to that broader political geography of emerging elites and their military power and their sociality created by around feasting, all the things that we connect to the Viking Age, but really are the products of that post 6th century, that late 6th century, 7th and into the 8th century.
Yeah, the Merovingian period, as it's called.
That's the word. Yeah, so we probably just should give up with all this Viking stuff and call it Merovingian and Carolingian, but we don't want the French and Germans to get away with everything, do we? But seriously, it's that kind of, they are the biggest political and socio-economic power in Northern Europe. And so yes, in traditional archaeological chronology in Norway, it's called the Merovingian period. In Sweden, it will be the Vendel period, and but so these terminologies are complicated. But in the centuries before the Viking Age is the simple point.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a very interesting landscape, as you said, and it clearly shows the evolution, the transition from this natural topography to a heavily modified anthropogenic environment in the Viking Age, the site of the Gokstad ship burial. So these new studies have shown that prior to the construction of the mound, we are dealing with a gently undulating surface, and they've done an analysis of the pedological profile, which is also very interesting, and they found that the soil types, they have poor drainage and they suffer from periodic surface saturation. Now, why this is important is because this shows that one of the features of this environment was an exceptionally high water table, which influenced this whole mortuary process, in the sense that the whole region is characterized by this marine silty clay, which forms these extensive wetland soils, which are also very suitable for grazing. So we also have settlements in this period, and this is also something fascinating, the fact that this burial was basically integrated within this this settlement. It was not something isolated on the margins, on the edge. It was within this settlement.
Yeah, right. I think it's important to say that what this new work tries to do is so much of the conception of Viking graves is the grave goods, and the grave goods we'll come to, but we're not jumping in there yet, because
those that are left at least.
Yeah, the whole point is this is a really complex sequence of almost technologies, of labor, of skilled work to construct these kind of mounds. It's not simply just bringing stuff together like some kind of Hollywood film. We go, who has the ship and who brought this, and some kind of like some bring a grave good party or something. But there must be orchestration, there must be a sequence that build and the ships and the artifacts that go in it and around it, the sacrifice of animals, that only can take place once the place has been prepared. So the work of Bill and Cannell Bill and MacPhail is looking at that process of constructing the mound. Yeah,
Yeah, and the fact that they've done it intentionally, like the whole this whole hydrological regime, it was an intentional, a deliberate choice because I think they were trying to create a bridge to the dead, because you know, we have these foundations that are really below the modern water table,
Yeah.
and so in a way during construction, the whole site would have been turned into like this muddy pool. So yeah, you're basically creating this sort of like liminal area between life and death, as a borderland between the world of the living and the world of the dead, which is also
Now, don't
fascinating.
get
Yeah.
me wrong, I'm really cynical, as other videos will attest, to suggesting we know exactly what people thought the destination was. But in terms of the performance, you know, for everyone and anyone, but in terms of the performance, don't get me wrong, I think that the careful choices of materials, location, materials, and
Yep.
the construction of this is to create a really memorable but very specific set of experiences for those involved, everyone from the thralls to
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
aristocrats gathered, maybe some only coming for a time, and we can't reconstruct all of that. But I think what you're looking at here is more than just some let's just pull it all together and have a party, you know. And it's clearly a lot
It's a
of
strategic act. Yeah.
and it's the idea of ritual framing of the students of anthropology of
Performance.
performance. This is really the material components of that process that we're able to build up. So yeah, and then after they then bring in the grave goods, you know, the exact sequence we don't know, and indeed the exact number we don't know, because so many objects were later robbed, and we'll come back to that. But we know there were, was it 12 sacrificed horses, 6 sacrificed dogs? Those can't be arbitrary numbers, and it looks like those weren't retrieved, they weren't robbed, so they were bones when the grave robbing took place. So
Yep.
I think we can be confident that the number of sacrificed horses and dogs found in the 1880s excavation reflects what was deposited there. So not only horses and dogs, the most important, should we say, psychopompic animals across societies, the guides for the dead person to the next world, but also aristocratic beasts, you know, hunting animals, guarding animals in the case of dogs, riding animals in the case of horses. These animals are part of that aristocratic culture. They're breeding, they're keeping, and they may have personalities of their own. They may have been prized animals, or the gifts of prized beasts by allies and kin to you know. So there's lots we don't know there, but these animals are not just how many horses are shove in another one, you know, let's let more blood please, you know. It's not these are clearly careful choices linked to not only who the dead were, who their kin were, but also where they think the dead are going and why they need those numbers. So I would imagine you're looking at a hunting pack of dogs. I don't know if that's the consensus, but that's the kind of thing we're looking at, and a retinue of warriors' horses, you know, so that you have you know, whether you know, they're not doing some literal sacrificing 12 warriors, but they are evoking a sort of what do you call it, a retinue or a hunting group, you know, that you could imagine men, women, maybe even older children participating in some kind of travel. And I wonder if that's or servants, you know. So you're getting this idea of the journey to the world of the dead is one that would not simply be one of getting in a ship, but many multiple stages. Maybe there's as in many cultures, you know, a narrative, and that's recorded in some of the Prose Edda and elsewhere, this idea of stage journeying rather than you know.
Right.
So we can't reconstruct that, we can't get into the minds of what people were getting at, but what we've clearly got is a spectacle of violence and killing, but also the ship, a tent, a sledge, a riding gear to go with the horses, evidence that journeying metaphor, that movement metaphor, and that simultaneously articulated the status of the living. They had the power to move, the power to be mobile, the power to go to war, but also to hunt and to travel and to, you know, that was the way that elites worked, was that mobility, not just sitting around in a hall waiting for you know, treasure to arrive or something. But also the ship is part of that, of course. You know, what staged journey that ship is on. So I just think this is so evocative. You can make up other scenarios like, well, maybe they were the horses that brought the wagons, hauled the wagons to the site, so they're to do with the journey that's already been conducted, as much as what's going next. But that chamber is just so utterly eerie as I'd find it eerie. I'm sorry, I don't want to sound over dramatic, but this idea of a small little chamber built for the dead, it's almost like a sleeping quarters on a ship, or sleeping quarters.
Well, he did have a bed as well, so.
Yeah. So this is for repose. This is for relaxation. There's all the the trappings of a life of luxury, but luxury on the move.
Yeah, I also find it very fascinating that this, like I said, was very in settlement proximity. Like, it would have been the whole community involved. It was very close to a trading site called Heimdalsfjordet, and it was very close to this sort of commerce and international exchange hub, and the whole surrounding valley is formed of extensive permanent field systems. Like, you have field boundaries, you have fences, you have grazing areas as well. So the mound would have been something that you would have seen and encountered quite frequently, experienced at close quarters. And there's also some evidence that there would have been some kind of subsequent rituals going on, like after they covered it with the turf layer, in the sense that they identified a trampled area, sort of like an entry point maybe to attend these burial rituals. There was a small area of topsoil in the northeast, and also they modified the landscape. Like, there were a lot of resources involved, extraction of local resources, and it shows, the last analysis shows that there would have been lasting scars on the environment. Like, the large areas would have been stripped of topsoil and turf to provide building material, and these areas would have become pools of standing water for a very long time. So it would have taken a great deal of time for this environment to recover, ecologically speaking. So that also shows how much effort and how much intention were involved in this preparation.
Yes, I mean, as the article by Canal et al. Says, mortuary practice is deeply connected to creating and maintaining ideologies and identities. Williams 2010. I don't know who that guy is, but anyway, the deliberate manifestation of social identity at Gokstad reaches beyond the artifacts and into every component of the burial ritual. And you talk about the interaction of the soil, maybe to do with time, place, belonging.
Yeah.
But they also then move on to talk about how this is not just about the funeral, but how this would have endured in the landscape. And that is absolutely, they re-turfed this, so they had to scrape all this turf up. Well, not just scrape. This was a really choreographed, not exactly like a golf course being re-turfed, but not far off, in that this must have been aesthetically important to make sure it was green and a hill for the dead. I like that idea very much. And the mound, therefore, they said, was frequently encountered and experienced at close quarters, and where it would endure as a guide in the landscape and in oral memory. Back Daniel 2015. Williams et al. 2015. Yeah, so that's me again. But the mound evoked and transformed selective memories. So yes, it's about this idea of the mound endures, and therefore would have whatever the authors wanted it to be. It survived. And I have again and again, I come up against people who perhaps don't get out of their house much and think, well, how can a mound be impressive? And I think they're perhaps used to even the great Bronze Age mounds around the Stonehenge landscape. They merge with the landscape, right? And that's the thing that I think people forget, is simultaneously they are a human-made construction, but simultaneously they integrate, they transform that landscape and merge with it. And from a modern sense of memorials, we think of stone, we think of erect, very prominent towers and obelisks, and that is our aesthetic of what a big, impressive, visible monument should be. But I think from a Vendel and Viking, or Merovingian and Viking Age world, they would be able to pick out and observe subtle transformations of the landscape. This was a time before railway embankments, canals. This is a time where you could see natural formations that look human made, and I think that's one side of the equation, things that look altered, that they may have invested stories and myths with, and even after long presence in the landscape, distinctive hillocks and that were mounds, right? So I think we have to appreciate that. And when we talk about dominance in the landscape, we're not talking about people seeing them from 100 miles away. We're talking about that local encountering them as you're going up fjords by ship, or in this case, in a landward environment, but very close to water, able to experience them traversing beside them. And I think it's that relationship that is so important. I think is perhaps for those that perhaps are sitting in front of a computer or a television or listening on their phones to us talk, it's very important to remember that it's all about movement during the funeral, but movement in the landscape. So every time people are trading and moving past their farms to the coast to go fishing, that daily quotidian, as we'd call it, that daily movements, but also processions and ceremonies, maybe to cult sites that were nearby, and maybe to worship at the mound itself, that there were rites to do with that respect for famed ancestors.
Yeah, exactly. And such memories were preserved in much later sagas where you have all these ideas about either people residing in the mounds or people sitting in the mounds or mounds being used in some sort of fertility rituals. They would have probably been like distant memories of this kind of ritual. And yeah, as you said, like they were very much integrated with the environment. And we also must take into account the whole process that was involved in constructing these mounds. I mean, to me, the most interesting thing about this mound is how they used to rebuild the land around the ship using these redeposited marine sourced blue silty clays, which they would have created quite a view. So it would have created this sort of like anaerobic environment, so the material packed around the hole, filling the muddy pool, and also it would have lent the impression that this entire vessel was submerged in this sediment before the superstructure was erected. And yeah, you can imagine also the contrast that you would have created by using this very clean and deep sourced material, the contrast it would have created with the surrounding gray and black sediment. So I think it would have been a very emotional experience and also a very emotional result, probably with some sort of ritualistic and mythical connotations, in a way perhaps reflecting, although yeah, it's a stretch of imagination, but I think it might be appropriate, evoking some sort of river that divides our world from the underworld, like the river of hell.
This may seem like a really obvious point, and I don't know if they say it in the article, because it's such a basic point. But getting that number of people together for communal activities would have been an integral part of life. Assembly, trading. These are exceptional ritual practices. Funerals are one of the occasions where you can bring a large number of people together for social economic action, right? That goes without saying. Howard, that's really basic, of course, right? But it's just a basic point that when people come together in our society, we're rarely doing earth moving. It's messy, it's dirty, it's you cannot. It allows to differentiate the directors from the laborers, but it also allows action that you cannot replicate. Doesn't matter how keen you are. If you've got 5 people doing something versus 100, 150, 200, these may not have been particularly dragged out events to make such large mounds. All you need is a large enough number of people and the direction to do it. And what I'm trying to suggest is that these if there is any mythical import or connection to these events, it would be completely unreplicable. Is that a word? You couldn't repeat it. Unrepeatable. You can't do it anywhere else. So what you're doing is you're creating a scenario that only can happen at the behest of a select group of people, at the direction, at the control of a certain group of people, that whatever the meanings people imported onto it, it will be utterly memorable as exceptional. And you're basically breaching the earth in a way that nobody could do quickly in any other scenario. So you're creating a unique moment, and I feel that's really important. So whatever, there's no way that you could, even if you're digging in your fields all year, you're going to get the depth and to the same deposits and the same structures as it's just like an archaeological excavation before modern machinery or quarrying.
Yep.
There's no other way you can get at that experience. I mean, and we know that in the Viking Age they are doing some linear earthwork building, not commonly, but in places there's other public works, bridge and causeway building. There's other big works going on, but nothing concentrated on a spot like this kind of burial. So what we're looking at here, we see is the archetypal Viking burial of we think it's a man, but we do have it is a 40-50-year-old man who is buried here. It seems it screams Viking chieftain or that type of, but actually it would have been in the Viking Age quite a rare thing to be participating in at such a grand funeral. It'd be a once in a generation type event to be participating in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as you said, we're dealing with the formation of a social memory of this community, and it would have revolved around the potential elite identity of this person. But yeah, it took several weeks to build, so one can imagine that a lot of people were involved and they did it together. And the construction was this like prolonged process that would have created really this materialized memory in the landscape. It was a communal effort. It involved a lot of planning, and it was designed to function as a living part of that particular regional power, and a way to like renegotiate oral memory and social identity.
But Irina, if I'm all right, you have to correct me if I misremember. It stays isolated, doesn't it? It doesn't become part of a cemetery. There's no immediate.
Actually, you can see from it further burial mounds. There is a clear line of about approximately 20 other burial mounds in the vicinity. It's not really, it's not really isolated, and it's also located adjacent to another mound that I think was not investigated yet. So it doesn't. Okay,
I'm wrong then. I'm wrong then. I just had this image in my mind that it was set apart from the others rather than being integrated into a cemetery. But that's my misremembering, because a lot of these cemeteries are part of a genealogy of burials. They're like they build on each other, and we can't always work out the exact chronological sequence.
I don't think there is a rule for that. I mean, some of them are isolated on the edge, on the margins, and some of them are integrated into the larger structures. Some of them are visible from great distance. Some of them only at close encounter. So, yeah. We cannot really draw any conclusions, I think, from
But go on.
And I just wanted to say that the article insists on this idea of legitimizing power, like to create this permanent landmark for the deceased. Legitimate claim to power through heritage. But like you said, I mean, there would have been a component, an ideological component, I suppose. But we should also take into account this communal component and what it implied for the community at large. But if we look at the individual and the inventory, I think it's safe to say that it was in the end someone of high social standing, like this person of between 40 and 45 years of age. He is described as a man of powerful build, and also with traumatic wounds, potentially during combat. So probably a Viking, if you were to follow the definition. Like, at any rate, someone involved in some kind of martial activity. And as usual, the scholarship, the earlier scholarship of the 19th century, was obsessed with finding someone by name, some king from the legendary Inglingar dynasty. But it's really impossible to say. I mean, there have been attempts at other mounds as well, and we've also talked about the Ragnarhaugen and how off everyone has been in relation to that interpretation. But I suppose people have always and will always be fascinated by this whole idea of finding the person who's buried here. We also have an inventory.
Go on, go on. No.
Yeah, we have
Go.
an inventory. So there is this bed with a dedicated wooden burial table, which we saw in the picture before, which is a reconstruction, obviously. He would have also had some textiles, tents, sleds, and also kitchen utensils with him, cooking gear. Very interesting. So all kinds of things. And you also mentioned the animals, so a lot of horses, dogs, hawks, and also a peacock, which is in itself very interesting. This has led to the idea that we are dealing with the archetype called the stranger king, which is defined in literature as being this leader who derives power from mediation with the foreign and the unknown, because the peacock, well, it doesn't really live in Scandinavia, but it rather originated from the Caliphate or South Asia. So it would have been kind of like an anchor for these far-reaching influence and the connections of this person. Yeah, so very interesting.
I mean, it may be even a personal pet, but it would have been such an iconic, distinctive
my
bird.
God, yeah, I
And
would
they're
like
so
to have a peacock
noisy.
pet.
They're so noisy. You know, you're not going to. I mean, just think about if you had one of those bashing around your longhouse in Viking Norway. Not only would the bird freeze very quickly, but it would annoy everyone because it was just like that. I love them actually. But they are distinctive. There's no northern European beast that sounds quite like them. So if this is wild. This is the ultimate elite statement, whether it's that person's but the goshawk, of course, is part of this. I mean, it's not new in the Viking Age, but that sort of Merovingian era, we see falconry coming to the north. We see it linked to predation metaphors and ideas of hunting, actual practices of hunting. So this speaks to all that highest echelon, doesn't it? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this idea of deriving authority from exotic associations. We also have that in a couple of Swedish sites where you also find a lot of items coming from the East. So you kind of like create this Eastern identity. And it's very interesting that we find like similar elements also in Norway. Yeah, definitely. And the shields are probably the most interesting things in this burial. I mean, because we don't have the weapons any longer, or any kinds of ornaments, brooches, and so on. So we're left with the shields. And as you can see, also an illustration of what these shields would have looked like. We have 64 round shields, and in the article written particularly about them, it is described that they constitute a profound material statement of the deceased social status and martial identity. They're arranged in this sort of like half moon aesthetic, which I find absolutely brilliant. I love it. And it was discovered that they were secured with thin brass cords that passed through the wooden handles on the reverse side, and they were tied to a purchase in the gunwale skirting. So they were integrated into the ship, and in this whole burial, I think, to create the sort of like dominant visual feature during the performance as well. I think it would have been absolutely majestic to see them during the performance, and they would have framed the ship within the mound as it was packed with this clay up to the level of the shield line. For a very long time, it was believed that they were ceremonial, but the newest study on them actually shows that they would have also had practical use. So this dichotomy between practical and ceremonial, I think, should be overcome as well. They were fashioned from white pine, and it is said in the article that they exhibit a complex system of radical and gentle tapering, which reduced the thickness at the extremities, but it maintained the core. So this served to reduce rotational inertia, and it actually facilitated defensive manipulation in hand-to-hand combat. So yeah, they would have also had practical use, and it was also discovered that they were perforated along the rims and also had stitching holes, which suggests that perhaps they would also been covered with some sort of parchment-like raw hide for the structural integrity during combat. Yeah,
there's a whole problem of how representative these are of broader shield use.
Yeah, but apparently they are.
but if we do see these as a real window into Viking shields, not only they're the importance for display, but they would have been much more lighter and more versatile in combat than this cliche of the shield wall,
Yeah.
and that they are for catching weapons as much as blocking blows, and therefore there's a whole debate about Viking Age combat and that we could have, but the point is that they would have been they're a sign again of this articulation of connection to fighting people, to the ability to mobilize them, to materialize them in the funeral, and they are part of how the ship should look. They're part of the whole display of the vessel. That you can't imagine it would look clothed without these shields upon it. So yeah, it's such an important aspect of the maritime experience of intimidating and displaying the potential violence that could break forth from that ship if you see it coming or you see it passing, but also in the funerary context, it's articulating that the power and connections of the people orchestrating the funeral. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we might consider them a representation, a symbolic representation of his retinue, because this is a ship that was meant for 64 people. I mean, it could have functioned with fewer, but yeah, it's definitely part of, like you said, this whole performative scene intended to sort of like maintain the social memory, not only of the retinue, but perhaps also of the community where they stemmed from, and yeah, of course, also supporting this whole idea of a martial identity in this political landscape of the Viking Age. Yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of the objects may have been plundered, so there may be further martial gear, there may have been other organic materials that have lost, or partially organic and metal objects. I mean, they presumably were going for the metal objects, but we don't have a full complement and assemblage. And there's always the question about whether there are other people there too. It wasn't just the subject of one chieftain, but it could have been other people. But at least on the assemblage we've got, it speaks to power, connection, identity of an elite, if not royal, with aspirations of royalty in the context of the 9th century, which may not be the same as the 11th century, but it speaks of all those things.
Yeah, exactly, and it also speaks a lot for the significance of the ship in general, like in history and mythology. So we've said it before, a symbol of transition, and this is something that you also see quite a lot in other sources, such as here on multiple picture stones from the island of Gotland. So this idea of the ship carrying the deceased, which is really not a Viking idea. It's like cross-cultural, but it's very well represented, both in the pre-Viking Age and in the Viking Age. I think it would have been even more important in the Bronze Age, where we have this connection with the sun as well, the sun and the moon. So it would have had some cosmological significance as well. And yeah, speaking of how to be carried into the other world, we also have this idea of the blazing ship being pushed out to sea, which I think is not really that far-fetched. I think there might have been some cases when that happened, although to me it makes more sense if you have like what you have here at Gokstad, like a monument that remains very much implemented into the landscape. But we have, at least in mythology, we have the example of Sigurd Ring, who is sent on a blazing ship pushed out to sea, so semi-legendary Norse king. And we also have the myth of Skjold, you find him in Beowulf, who is again is representative of this idea of the divine king who arrives in a boat laden with treasure, and then he is sent back to the other world in a similar fashion. Yeah, and in mythology you can also find stuff like, the ship of Freyr, Skidbladnir, which is a very cool ship. It can be folded up like a cloth and put it in a pouch whenever you don't use it. So yeah, sort of practical. And perhaps the best known example for this whole idea of sending someone away in the ship to the other world is the case of Baldur's funeral.
Yeah.
Baldur's funeral has a huge vessel. They have to summon a giantess, Hirokin, who arrives riding a wolf, and she has to push it because they couldn't find anyone so powerful that that they actually managed to push it to sea, and the whole world trembles when she does it. So it's a pretty dramatic moment. And then you also have this sinister ship called Nagelfar, the nail ship, which again I think it's representative of this whole martial culture, in the sense that it is constructed by the untrimmed fingernails and toenails of the dead, and it's going to carry the armies of chaos, the armies of the dead of hell at Ragnarokr. So yeah, you can see maybe a very distant memory, a mythical memory of this importance of the ship in rituals, in much older rituals, reverberations of it in much later mythology.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we also have some very interesting metaphors in skaldic poetry, which is it is Viking Age poetry from the 9th and 10th century. So it has a very often association with horses. For example, it's often called a sea stallion or a wave horse, which I think it's also significant because again it shows like the symbiotic relationship between maritime travel and travel, like mortuary travel, because the horse is also associated with that sort of ritual. So there might be a connection there.
And it's also important to remember, if I can just interject slightly, that and I don't think it's always mentioned that given the new evidence that we've discussed, I think before in our discussions about the Heathwood Ingleby horses, and the long discussions of how much Scandinavian horses were traveling in ships long distance, that we have to, in terms of thinking of the connection of travel on land and travel on water, horses could get into boats, right? And so you've got this kind of, in a funerary context, you've got a potential connections here, that the boat transports people with the animals, or do the animals pick up some of the stages of the journey? There's all, and of course the other point I want to make is that if you're thinking about journeying, those horses may be hauling the ships over portages, and so the horse is part of the sea journey. So that there's layers here, or many facets at least, to the connections that are people who are experiencing maritime travel and then remembering how it may have been down the centuries would connect horses and travel with the ship. So
yeah, definitely. There is a very lengthy study about the relationship between ships and this martial culture in general, written by Judith Jesh, Ships and Men in the Viking Age, I think it was called. And what she does really well is to like analyze all these poetic names and the kennings, and also the imagery to describe these vessels. So yeah, that's a really good source. But I think we should move on, if
yes, of course.
and
So
discuss
this is
about
moving on to
the best part of it, I think, the breaking episode.
Yeah, these barrows. I mean, I would like to sort of start off by saying these barrows weren't being broken into, right, for a long time. There's clearly a lot of fear / respect for these big burial mounds, and the scale of them makes it very difficult to secretly sneak up and tickle away at it. You know, and you have to, if you're going to do a mound breaking of a mound this big, the scale in which it's been constructed means you have to conduct a major excavation that will be public, will be therefore sanctioned or released. So the fact that these were we call them grave robbed, you know, that's not the right term. This was clearly a systematic, intervention. Whether everyone liked it or not is, we don't. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say at first, but go on.
No, totally. This was very systematic, and this was actually noticed as far back as 1880 when Nikolai did the excavation. He was actually very disappointed that he found it in such a state, because it was in a bad state. I mean, some parts of it are missing. So, I mean, were missing before the reconstruction was made. But definitely, it was broken into like not a very long time after it was deposited here. And this has to do, as was pointed out, especially by Björn Myhre, with the fact that we are dealing with a very contested zone between Danish and Norwegian influence, like the Viken region. And I suppose the local rulers seized power whenever opportunity arose, and when seeing this mound, it likely was interpreted as a symbol of the old, like perhaps the old power or the old hereditary rights, perhaps, although I'm not very sure if it really delineated something, but at any rate, it would have been an important monument in the area, and it would have been a very living monument at the time. So it is estimated that it was broken into in about 939 to 1050. That would be the range of it. And it is theorized that they are probably agents of the Danish king Harald Bluetooth, which would make sense chronologically speaking. And it is interpreted as a neutralization of the dead, which I think is a good term to use here. In Norwegian, it's actually a bit different. It's called ufarliggjøring, which means to make something less dangerous, which again, I think is pretty symptomatic of what is going on here. So yeah, he was probably on this campaign to consolidate Danish power in Norway. This is also suggested by his very propagandistic monument at Jelling, where he defines himself as both a Danish and a Norwegian ruler. And this act of violence, because I think we may consider it an act of violence, this really confirms that what he was trying to do is to break a monument of major importance, political importance, and social importance in the area. And as you said, rightfully, it would have been a staged and highly public event because it wasn't really easy to do such a thing, and it would have been an ideological statement, if you think of it. Like, you want to neutralize whoever was dominating the area before you, their lineage, and whatever they represented. And it's a similar thing we can see also in the case of the Oseberg burial. So subduing local monuments, it's the best theory.
And of course, Dr. Alison Cleveness has made the point, and I think we can't know for sure, but I think we've got to think about what's not there. And is this I don't think it's either or, but it's about the breaking in and decommissioning of that site and its significance. But then what are you retrieving? What famed objects that were famous were remembered from the funeral that was so dramatic and memorable? Or once you recover them, as we know with so many relics of saints, you make them into something fabulous. you turn them into a story of that isn't mundane. And so we don't know what swords, but we can spears. But you could take it in
the
one
weapons
grave.
are missing, so
in one grave you could have potentially all manner of heroic legends that you could spin out for years of telling over the fireside about those objects and how you now have them and what are you now going to do with them. And we know from Anglo-Saxon law wills of some of the ancient swords that were still banging around, and which late Anglo-Saxon king apparently had a sword of offer. Was it Ethelred the Unready, or was it Edgar? I can't remember. Anyway, one of the late Anglo-Saxon kings had a sword purportedly to have been owned by the Mercian king Offa. Different dynasty, different kingdom, but a famed old sword. Was it retrieved from his grave? Probably not. But the point is, we know that it's a Europe-wide phenomenon of old things having value beyond being heirlooms, but the stories of where they came from, of what deeds they conducted. So we can suggest that, and it's not outrageous speculation, but not outrageous speculation to suggest that it was the breaking in and decommissioning of those graves, but also the things that were retrieved and the stories that were told about them that was really what was going on here. Valuable things, but not for melting down, for making into something new, but for curating, displaying, and storytelling.
Exactly,
It's very much like early archaeology in a way.
Yeah, things of quality that you would have kept, and they're definitely remembered in a very compelling manner in the legendary sagas, where this has become a trope, like breaking into someone's mound and retrieving some sort of weapon, with the variation that sometimes the people residing in the undead residing in the mounds, they are the ones offering these weapons to future generations. Yeah,
Yes,
in the tale of Olaf Geirstad, I think it's also the example used by Klefnes in her article, who is actually transferring the items, like this pagan semi-legendary king is transferring the items to Olaf the Holy in order to signify like both the Christianization process and the transfer of power. And of course, you have one of my favorite examples from the whole of Icelandic literature, which is the waking of Angantyr, when you have Hervor, who goes to her father's grave, and she recites this poem, and she talks to him in the guise of a poem, trying to convince him to hand over her rightful heirloom. So yeah, it would have been a very, very popular element of these later legendary sagas.
fantastic.
Yeah, so the trench was very deep, and it was about 6 meters deep and 20 meters long. So this clearly indicates that it was a communal effort, and it was, as it says in the article, a temporary legal space. So whatever authority was protecting the people who undertook this operation, they definitely wanted this to happen, and they were very much aware of what was going on. So the local population had to be under the protection of such authority for such an event to take place.
Absolutely.
They also left behind some spades, and it has been found out that some of them were even made up of reused wood from the Gokstad ship itself, because they destroyed parts of it, including the bottom of it. And among other things, also the furniture within the burial chamber was pulled out and destroyed. And the remains were also not treated in a very respectful manner, because they were scattered. And I think some of them were even taken away, because we're only left with 4 leg bones, shoulder blade, and fragments of the arm and the skull. And the skull might have even been destroyed itself, like consciously destroyed, not by accident.
So you may be having disrespect for the dead, but also trophy taking in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, so much is unknown.
Yeah, at any rate, we're dealing with the destruction of memory. Like somebody was clearly trying to denigrate this person, whoever they were, to maybe humiliate the defeated lineage of the local power in the area. Like you said, decommission it or neutralize the dead. Might have to do something with Christianization as well, the desecration of a high status pagan monument, because Harald Bluetooth, he wanted to be a Christian too. So sure. Right, and in Oseberg something similar happens. So we have a break-in occurring after 953, kind of like the same chronology, a similar chronology, and also here the bones are scattered. A lot of stuff is destroyed, and it's like this whole idea of public display, like you're really showing it to the community. You're showing what you're doing, and you're also protected, at least for a short period of time. The skeletons of the 2 women, they were pulled in the trench and scattered. The faces were missing, cranium was crushed, and also the ship's stem was cut down demonstratively, we can say, at Oseberg as well. So we have a demonstrative destruction, if we might call it that, with potential geopolitical motivations.
And we see again and again in the archaeological record the archaeology of what you could call regime change in funerary monuments. And there's been a big discussion by Deirdre O'Sullivan about Northern English funerary monuments, the rebuilding of churches in the Norman conquest, and that a lot of the Viking Age hogbacks are not in their original context, and the reuse of them into church material may be as much about decommissioning the lineages that they represented. And this is a phenomenon we find around the world, that the dead don't rest easy, And there is a lot of, it doesn't mean that every second day of the week there's another grave robbing. It's just there are sanctions, there are taboos, there are prohibitions, but through profit motive, but also through socio-economic and political motives, the dead can be disturbed. And I think with these big phenomenal mounds, they were an obvious target for resistance and claims that needed to be, transformed, adapted, decommissioned.
Yeah, sometimes some curiosity perhaps also
Yeah.
wanted to know what lies in this mound. But yeah, definitely we have, like in the case of Gokstad and Oseberg, we have a political case here of public desecration. I suppose it would have demoralized your rivals as well, like if you performed such a thing.
But it also it does presume a social connection, a communication, because there's no point in doing it if the people you're doing it to don't believe the same things or similar things. So you've got to have some kind of social, cultural, shared framework for both the, for this to be an insult or a denigration, it's got to be a connection. Yeah,
Definitely, yeah. So, I suppose my last point to make here. So, yeah, this is the Gokstad ship. It used to be, because now it's being moved.
Yes.
It was moved already.
New museum. Yes.
Yeah. Now I think they're busy with the sledges last time I checked.
Oh.
But at any rate, there was so before making my last point, which is actually about the Borage Cemetery, one thing that we should remember about this ship is also that it started to collapse like a while ago. It's very fragile, and the oak is very dry, and it didn't really have the best conditions in the museum, which is why they are building this new place, the new Museum of the Viking Age, which is actually going to open next year, which makes me very excited. Yeah, but at any rate, it was a very narrow space, insufficient room, and the air was also full of dust. And because of the whole vibration of the floor, the ship was really in a bad condition, and they really needed a larger space for it. But yeah, to come back to this idea, so the last example to kind of like connect to Gokstad and also Oseberg and this idea of the mound breaking is really the work of Bjørn Myhre. It's the interpretation of the Borre Cemetery, which is pretty close to the Oseberg ship, as you can see. And he doesn't speak specifically about mound breakings here, but he does touch on it as well. So the Borre burial ground, as described in his monography, what I think is most interesting about this work is the fact that, again, we're dealing with this very dynamic religious and political arena. They have also been associated with the Ynglingar dynasty, as well as the Gokstad ship. And if you look at the whole site, it's really also a sort of materialization of these shifting power dynamics that are taking place in the 600s and moving on into the Viking Age. So he basically says that these were built as aggressive statements of legitimation by various elite factions vying for control over the strategic Oslofjord. And he also speaks quite a lot about this idea of staging performance for ritual and also political performance. And also in this case, the mounds were built using very large volumes of topsoil stripped from active agricultural fields. So we're also dealing with a settlement and with this whole burial taking place within the settlement. And he also speaks of the seeding of the dead in the life-giving earth, which I think is a very nice metaphor to sort of like link the potential ancestral power with land productivity, maybe. So speaking of the fertility of the land and such. Yeah, in these graves, or at least in those which have been excavated, we also have some very interesting items that again suggest the idea of the stranger king archetype, because we have silk, we have gold threads, we have oriental style belt fittings, we have lavish equestrian equipment with some parallels to graves found at Birka and Adelsö in Sweden, and also the Rus. Principalities of Kiev, for example. So this whole notion of being able to mediate or integrate exotic and foreign realms. Right, and yeah, this was the point I was going to make, the fact that the mounds were broken as well. And this is also linked to the neutralization attempt. So this sort of like metaphysical power associated with the dead, which is eliminated by performing such a desecration, and by publicly violating these structures, potentially a new authority, in our case, most likely the Danish Jelling dynasty, would have symbolically terminated the claims of the rivals to both land and leadership. And also in this case, we have visible plunder shafts acting as sort of like a permanent symbol of the fact that the predecessor has been defeated and their ancestral protection has been terminated, because they were plundered, and very violently. So definitely this kind of physical evidence would suggest that now we're dealing with a new authority which is claiming these lands. That's basically it.
Remains a visual symbol of that that decommissioning. Yeah,
exactly. Right. So again, this aligns very much with the chronology we have seen in the case of Oseberg and Gokstad, and the basic idea is that you're using such violations to sort of demoralize your local rivals and to demonstrate your own superiority and contribution to the centralization of power that is going on in the Danish realm at the time.
Yes. And all I can add to this is that we still don't really know whether there are parallel processes going on elsewhere. There are certainly other places where we can talk about mounds being transformed with Christianization, such as at Gamla Uppsala. But the question is, we should be presuming and looking for grave robbing everywhere we look. Not saying that it was ubiquitous, but we should assume we're not looking at a one-phase burial, and we should assume we're not looking at, because there may be burials, secondary burials, and you were talking about that in a recent video of your own, Irina, elsewhere in northern Norway. But we should also think about looking for evidence of disturbance, and disturbance is an archaeologically neutral term for ransacking or plundering or looting, but sometimes it may be a multiple motivations, so we have to sort of use neutral language because we're not exactly sure why people would be doing that. And sometimes it may be about making an ancestral connection, sometimes it may be about decommissioning, other times it may be about Christianization, or a mixture of these different ideas.
Yeah, definitely it carries a symbolism that we're not fully capable of grasping.
So, well, thank you so much for that presentation, Irina, and
thank you so much for the conversation.
And we should scheme about where we go next, and hopefully we'll have more Mounds and Memory coming your way soon.
Yes, many more mounds to come. Be sure to subscribe to both our channels and to follow our podcast. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and until next time.
Follow ArchaeoDeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.